Ik sê vir die nurse, suster, ek weet nie wat was nie. Hier lê 'n klomp bloed van. Ek was bang vir
branches I can see all the way down to the river.
For storytelling probably comes from the way I was brought up. There were always stories around the table, around the fire in the evenings.
I think I've always been a storyteller. I was a storyteller as a child. I suppose there were points of recognition, recognizing how deeply I was a storyteller.
The earliest memory that I have was in grade 3 when I was reading a book by Beatrix Potter called Peter Rabbit. And I just loved that story, and I was like, I can write a story like that. And then jump to grade 9, where I was introduced to theater. So I wasn't quite a novelist, I realized. I'm like, no, I don't want to tell stories like this. I want to write plays. I want it to be active. I want it to be live. So that's where I think I started with the storytelling journey.
For the first time, the Women Playwrights International Conference was hosted here in Cape Town, South Africa, and it brought female playwrights from all over the world to the African continent for the first time. And this is where I met a group of Canadian playwrights. We sort of started talking about the fact that in South Africa, there's so few opportunities for especially women writers to get paid to write. And after the conference, I picked up this conversation with Beverly Cooper, who's the sort of founder of this fund as well, and her team. And they were the ones who came up with the initiative and the idea to establish a fund that would give space and time and money for a woman playwright to finish a project, to just be able to focus on her writing for 3 or 4 months.
My dreams were full of noise and running, climbing up to check for the elephants. This way's clear.
Thin Air is the story of Kestrel, who is injured, damaged, you might say, emotionally damaged. She's retreated into the bush, into the wilderness. She's living alone in a baobab tree. She has a relationship with her child, but she's cut off all kind of other relationships with her mother. And in a way, she's calling back to set straight something that had happened in the past.
The play that I wrote is called Lamb versus Slaughterhouse, and it follows 5 beings, all of them female or femme-identifying, and they're put in a position where they have to sort of find out, research, and come to a conclusion on a life or death situation pertaining to gender-based violence. And I've sort of written it as an impossible choice situation, that from the beginning the audience kind of sees that they can't really come up with a resolution that pleases everybody. And I love those kinds of stories, because if you're in those shoes, what would you do facing an impossible choice? Go from pry your legs open. Level violence number 1, go.
Pry your legs open using their dirty hands and drool on you, hit you, bite your head off until your bones stick out of your skin.
Pause. I realized that if I want to write a play that applies to an international context in terms of gender-based violence, I can't just set it in a legal setting. Decisions are made by government, decisions are made by doctors, decisions are made by religious groups. And in terms of the characters not having names, it won't help if I give them a particular identity. So I wanted to keep the names of the characters and the setting open enough for them to conform to whatever setting they believe works for their community.
The play is called Beginnings, the play that I wrote for CASA. And the seed for that was planted. A woman called Jessica Violetta came to see my play, Womb of Fire. And afterwards, she told me she needed to share her research with me. And it was research on obstetric violence. And quite close to that time, my mother stopped smoking. And she was flooded with memories that I think she'd suppressed, particularly around the death of my younger sister. And told me all the stories, the details that she was remembering, and she said that she had to write it down, but she didn't write, and basically tasked me with writing it for her. And the more I read into and spoke to women about these stories, the more and more common they became. And I realized that this was a pervasive situation.
En toe ek op pad badkamer is toe, die lê dan nou bloed soos jy inkom as daar bloed, as jy wil op die toilet gaan sit, daar so bloed, op die shower bloed. Niemand gaan dit skoonmaak, jy moet dit self skoonmaak.
So I grew up in a wilderness area really in eastern Zambia, the Luangwa Valley, South Luangwa National Park. My grandfather was involved in safaris and walking safaris in particular. He was also a storyteller and very much part of my education in terms of trying to instill in me a love of the bush, a love of the knowledge of the birds and the trees and the soil and the animals. My understanding of nature is that it's not just pretty trees and birds and whatever, it's also death and hunting and predation and decay and all of those things. You know, this, I suppose it takes on almost a tragic quality in a way, that there's this sense of threat, this sense of doom, and then having to make sense of what was with what's happening now. I feel like we have to reimagine it and just rethink the way we do nature, the way we speak to nature, the way we understand where we belong. I don't often see that on stage, so I guess I'm interested in trying to find ways of bringing those worlds into our artistic experiences.
It's shocking that we allow each other to be born in violence. I started speaking to people about it, and then the particular forms of racial violence that happened and the words that people said, the abuse that women of color experience, the words that everybody told me, they said, like, you wanted to open your legs and you liked it when it went in, all of these sexually degrading, abusive things. When you're doing this, you're birthing a human being into the world.
Gender-based violence is a pandemic. We want to speak about COVID-19 was a pandemic, right? And we saw how various people in the world came together to try and get rid of the pandemic as soon as possible. I think gender-based violence needs to be on the same level. And that's why I wanted to write Lamb versus Slaughterhouse, is to look at the systems that can get rid of these things, but is very slow to do so.
We noticed there was, I think, a gap for women playwrights specifically around mentorship and also about opportunity. It feels like sometimes a luxury to be able to, if your first career is not that you're a professional writer, and it's very hard to make a living as a professional writer, it's so difficult to pause your life around being creative, taking the space and the time to just be able to dream. And I think often, especially in South Africa, the opportunities for working professionally in theatre is so small. There's so few of those kind of opportunities.
As women, we have so many other demands on us that it can be really difficult to prioritize this crazy thing, which is just making stories and sitting alone. It's really hard to justify that time.
Just having equal opportunity, resources, and space to put on the plays that you want to put on. A lot of the time, you find that you have to write plays in a certain way for a certain audience, which does not necessarily pertain to what the playwright might want to write. So I think there's issues around that a little bit. And then bring in the lack of resources for everybody to have the same amount of time, same space, and same platforms to put on their plays is, I think, the biggest thing that female playwrights in South Africa are facing today.
What makes, I think, this partnership so special is that there hasn't, I think, been a collaboration between the Playwrights Guild of Canada before with South Africans. It's the first award where these two countries are sort of speaking to each other about theatre. What's also great about it is that there's a Canadian mentor attached to every project. And so the sort of expertise and the skills transfer and the knowledge transfer goes from, you know, the Canadian side to the South African side.
Well, Sarah was my mentor. It's kind of vital to have someone to be able to refer to, you know, someone to talk ideas through with and to hold you through a process, especially if it's one that's going to shake you a little bit, if it's challenging. to provide an eye and a voice that is kind of beyond yours. Yeah, it's integral. Mentorship is integral to the process.
CASA gives female playwrights of various ages in various perspectives to write about what they're concerned about. And then hopefully that would push forward and manifest in them moving up a generation and being able to pass that knowledge down to whoever needs it. So CASA also helps fill in that gap. So now we're all there being representative of a generation. So that's très magnifique. Pardon my French.
I think for the future of South African theatre, if this, like these past couple of years have taught us anything, is that we're going to have to become really inventive to find ways to stop doing things the traditional ways we've been taught. So I think people are making really exciting strides in terms of working in new mediums and formats and in new spaces and playing a little bit and being experimental. And I think COVID and the whole stoppage of theatre gave us the opportunity to reimagine a little bit what theatre could look like and what conventional theatre can look like. We're always going to need theatre to reflect our society. Theatre as a form of expression is always going to continue living. So I'm really excited, especially about women's voices feeding into that.
I don't think theatre is ever going to die. The live experience is never going to die. Live connections to each other is not going to stop. Theatre in the form of proscenium arch buildings where you pay for tickets, I don't see much value in that. But, you know, it might endure. People might see that as a place.
What I would like to say to other aspiring female writers is that write what you like. This is your time. This is, your perspective is the golden egg, the golden nugget of what our society needs right now. Don't be afraid to go there. You can always reel it back in. You can always edit it. But write what you like. Just go there and see what happens. Yeah, don't be afraid. Don't be tentative. Without fear, go.